I am Brian Lee Durfee, author of The Forgetting Moon, published by Simon & Schuster's Saga Press. You can see the book right there. Today, I'm going to be reviewing, as you can see, It by Stephen King. Got a hardcover copy right there, paperback right there. And I also have the Audible.com version. That's 3 versions of the same book. In fact, I do that with about every book I own. Get the hardcover, paperback, and Audible.com version. You guys can do the same when you buy my book. So let's talk about It. The first ever novel I ever read by Stephen King was Christine. The second one was Salem's Lot. The third one was It. You know, Salem's Lot followed by It. That was those were the books that made me a Stephen King fanatic as a kid. Just get that out of the way. I love this book. Now, if you've been following my reviews, we've been reviewing every Stephen King novel in publication order. We've got to It. That's where we're at. We are at It. In the publication order, if you want to follow some of my other previous reviews, I will link to some of those at the end of this video. Also, if you've been following my reviews, you know that not only am I reading these books, I'm also listening to the Audible.com version as I read along in the book. The Audible.com version of It was performed by the voice actor Steven Weber. He's done some other Stephen King books before. He does a good job. No complaints. Great job to all involved with the Audible.com narration and production of the book It. Great. Loved it. Now let's talk about the book itself. Like I said, the third ever Stephen King novel I read when I was just a probably freshman or sophomore in high school. And let me tell you, this was probably the biggest book I had read up to that point. You know, I guess we could count The Lord of the Rings, but I consider that like a trilogy of smaller books than this, but all combined maybe equal to this size. But this was the biggest book that I had read up to that point. And I was glued to it from the beginning. I'm going to mention my one thing that I dislike about this book right to begin with, and it was something that I disliked about it the first time I read it, and that was we have the 7 main characters in the Losers Club named Bill, Ben, Eddie, Richie, Stanley, Beverly, and Mike. I had a hard time keeping track of those people, especially because they've all got such common names. And I know that when I write my own books, I try to make every name that's in the book vastly different from every other name in the book, because my books are as big as It, and I've got a lot of characters, and I don't want people to be lost with characters that have similar sounding names like Bill and Ben, Mike and Rich. The names were just too common for me, and I found myself getting lost about who was who quite a bit of the time. In fact, I didn't really get it straightened out until I kind of, after reading the book and I wanted to reread it again, I went and watched the mini-series with the early mini-series, and that was a little later in life when I watched that, but it was when I read this the second time. I wanted to I remembered how confused I was with the names, and so I watched the miniseries just so I could put a face to the name. John Ritter was this guy. Richard Thomas was this guy. Harry Anderson was this guy. And now you can do the same thing with the new movie that's come out with all the new actors. Very helpful. And maybe this book would have been helped by having like a roster of names in the back or the front, like a character list, and who they were and how they related to each other, things like that. Such a minor quibble of mine for a book that is otherwise a masterpiece. Let me tell you. Let's talk about some of these main characters. This book, as you know, everybody, I'd say at this point, if you're watching this video, you've read it. I do spoiler-free reviews, but I imagine if you're watching this video, you've probably read it or seen the movie or the miniseries. You're familiar with the story. Needless to say, I'm not going to get into spoilers. We're just going to talk about generalities here and how much I love the thing. But it starts in 1958 with a bunch of the little kids, the Losers Club. Georgie runs off with his little sailboat floating in the creek, in the gutter, and the little sailboat goes into the sewer drain, and Pennywise the clown, hello, Georgie. I can't do it. I'm not Tim Curry. I'm not the other guy that did. I can't do a good Pennywise the clown. But we know he pulls Georgie in because we all float down here. We all float down here. Come on, Georgie. And that's the beginning of the story. The murder of Georgie. Gets his arm ripped off by the killer clown Pennywise. And then we have the Losers Club with Bill, who was Georgie's older brother, Ben, the overweight kid, Eddie, the asthmatic, Richie, Stanley, Beverly, Mike. They form this club because they're picked on kids. They're average kids. They're picked on kids. There's bullies in the town. This is what sets up the story so great. And it goes back and forth in time from when these kids were just young in 1958 to when they're adults in 1985. I think everybody loves the young versions of these kids a lot more than the older versions of these kids, and they like reading the story about the young versions of these kids because we all relate. We all know what Stephen King is talking about with the Losers Club. We relate to one, if not all, of these characters on some level. I mean, the themes that Stephen King is working with are the classic themes that he always works with, and those are, the loss of innocence, crime and racial divides, religious divides, bigotry, homophobia. This one, as we're dealing with industrial pollution and the environment, it's kind of like the, what Pennywise represents. And Stephen King does all these things really well. You strip away the killer clown out of this book. You strip away the horror elements out of this book and the murders and the gruesome scenes, and you just put in the family drama or the small town drama, and you've got yourself a piece of literary fiction that rivals, and I've said this before about Stephen King's work, literary fiction that rivals, John Irving or Pat Conroy or Herman Wouk or any of those guys that just wrote great literary fiction about families and family drama. It has all of that and more because you get killer clowns on top of it. Imagine all of the characters in a John Irving novel being chased by a killer clown, and that's what you got. I mean, Stephen King is a national treasure. Stephen King is comparable to the Beatles. I mean, that's how iconic he is. And the novel It is his White Album. I mean, he's just a national treasure, and It will go down as a classic novel about young people and dealing with the loss of innocence and all that. And it's not only has It inspired other books like, Robert McGammon's Boy's Life, which I think does, the angsty life of and coming of age tale as good, if not better, than Stephen King does in It, but that's certainly inspired by It. So are movies like Stand By Me, which was a Stephen King written story, The Body. So was like things like The Sandlot, movies like that. They all take their inspiration from It. This is the first novel that really gave us small town kids dealing with small town problems at the same time being chased by a killer clown. And you can't do it better. You can't do it better than what Stephen King did. He did it fantastically. The book, like I said, it's told in two parts. The 1958 kids perspective and then the 1985 adult perspective when they grow up. So there's a horror that comes through Derry, Maine every so often and just screws things up. The kids deal with it in 1958 and they forget all about it. It was traumatizing. The things that they did were traumatizing And we know at the end, the controversial end in the book, I won't tell you what it is, but if you read the book, you know what I'm talking about. They couldn't put that in the movies because nobody would go watch the movie if they put that in the movie because it's creepy. I mean, kind of creepy, if you know what I'm talking about. And they didn't put that in the movie, but they did the movies differently and the miniseries differently at the ending because they just couldn't put the Stephen King's real ending to the book in there because it's creepy. One of his more controversial endings, to be honest with you. People either love it or hate it. It can either be lauded or, criticized for just being creepy. Anyway, these kids have forgotten all about it. They went through some trauma and they forgot all about it, which is a real phenomenon if you believe in, repressed memory. But all these kids have the repressed memory where they forgot about the killer clown and the crap and the horrors that it caused in their small town. And then they grow up, and then in 1985, when they're adults, they all come back to Derry, Maine to face their childhood traumas and to face it, the creepy clown. That's the basic plot. That's the basic plot. There's no need to really rehash it much more. I just got to tell you that when I read Stephen King novels, in fact, I think that when everybody reads Stephen King novels, it is the one they compare everything else to. Probably even more than The Stand. The Stand is my favorite novel of all time. The Stand is my favorite Stephen King novel. But when I really do think of Stephen King, what I think of is it. The themes and the characters of it. The creepy clown, the kids on their bicycles, the kids just trying to live normal lives with whacked out parents, with dysfunctional fathers, with abusive mothers, with just religious weirdos that are raising them. And we all get it. That's why it strikes such a chord in everybody, is because it encapsulates all of our youths combined and all of our horrors about adulthood and childhood and what it's going to mean when we grow up, who are we going to be when we grow up, the nostalgia we have for our childhoods, everything about that Stephen King's got in there, and it's a literary classic. It's literally a literary classic. I cannot tell you, if you have not read it, you haven't read anything. I mean, if you're a reader and you haven't read it, I don't really consider you much of a reader, because you've at least had to have read it. And if not, pick it up now and get it, because it's awesome. Awesome, awesome, awesome. I give it a solid 10 out of 10. I rate things 1 through 10. This one gets a solid 10 out of 10. It's a great, great, great American novel. Stephen King is an American treasure. I am enjoying doing these book reviews. Please follow the book reviews. I will link to the rest of my Stephen King reviews at the end of this video. I'm going to do them all, folks. That's my goal. All Stephen King novels in order of publication. It's going to be like 80 videos. But it's going to be cool. It's going to be cool when it's all finished and done. All said and done. So let's give thanks to Stephen King for writing such a great novel in it. Loved it. Loved it. 10 out of 10. As you know, every book I write, I dedicate to Stephen King, Funko Pop King, Motley Crue, and the Oakland Raiders, because they were the 3 most important things to me as a kid. And so they get a shout out in every book I write. Thanks for watching the video. Stephen King's It.